Hey there, I'm Catalina Villegas. I'm the host of Rolli's Experts Explain Everything podcast. Rolli is the platform where journalists find experts for their stories. It is created by journalists and for journalists. And as a journalist myself, I love to find fascinating people on Rolli, experts with so much knowledge and insight, and yet it rarely makes it past the headlines. So today, I'm bringing on one of those experts to answer all the burning questions I've ever had. I'm chatting with Maria Flynn. She is president and CEO at Jobs for the Future. JFF is a national nonprofit that drives change in American workforce and education systems to achieve economic advancement for all. Maria, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Catalina. It's wonderful to be here with you today.
Let's start with your career. How did you first launch a career working in the economy and in labor policy?
Yeah, so it's really goes back to really how I grew up. So when I was growing up, my father was working for the New Jersey State Department of Labor for many years, and my mother was a school secretary in our local back then we called it our local vocational school, or today we would call it a career and technical education school. And so I literally just grew up around issues of different career pathways, of jobs, and how to help individuals, particularly workers and learners from underserved backgrounds, advance in the economy. So it's something that I have worked on my whole career. After college, I went to work for the U.S. Department of Labor, where I was for many years, about 16 years, had a number of terrific roles across the department. And in 2007, I decided to leave federal service to come work at Jobs for the Future. And I just feel that, throughout the 30 some years of my career, or the decades that my parents worked on these issues before that, jobs and how we spend our work life and how we prepare ourselves for our careers are just such a critical issue, and one that I feel in this moment of whether we call it the great resignation or the great reshuffling is more critical than ever. So it's a passion of mine, and it has really been a real pleasure to be working on these issues.
That takes me directly into my next question. There's so many things happening in terms of labor right now. As you mentioned, the great resignation. We're also seeing changes in terms of AI. We are feeling a lot of different things when it comes to inflation. And I wonder for you, what are some of those top trends that your team is tracking right now that is related to that? And what are you maybe most concerned about?
Yeah, you're right. There are so many factors that are really kind of merging together, I think, in this moment. So, one, we find ourselves, as we're recording this in July of 2020, so 2+ years into the pandemic and all of the shifts that has caused, both in our economy overall and then specifically around jobs. I think the continued changes in automation and technology and the impact that those things have on jobs and how workers relate to work and do their work is certainly a second one. I think that what we're feeling now in terms of supply chain shortages, climate change issues, the inflation that we're kind of feeling on a daily basis, and the possibility of a recession, really adds all that more complexity, I think, to the moment that we're in. And so I think it's important to be looking at, all of these factors, how it's impacting workers, how it's impacting learners, and particularly, the racial equity implications of these issues, and how different segments of the population are being impacted differently kind of at this moment, and how we can be working now to ensure greater equity and equitable economic advancement moving forward.
Right, and that's something that we know is so Very important. I wonder if a lot of the work that you do at JFF, do these trends that we're seeing now, do these even make it into your calculations, or are you so big picture in terms of we're thinking 20, 30, 40 years down the road that even these minor inflation or minor recessions don't necessarily make it into the calculations?
Yeah, that's a great question. We really look at it in probably from two perspectives. So, one is really looking at that big picture, looking at long-term trends, looking to see, what futurists are saying about, what the workforce of the future might look like, what the jobs projections are, for the decades to come. But we also realize that, at the end of the day, it really matters how work is touching down within a community or within a regional economy. And so a lot of our day-to-day work at JFF is really working with leaders at the federal, state, or local level to really build the equitable pathways for economic advancement and helping to ensure that the education and training programs that are offered in those areas are really aligned with real-time labor market demand. So we really think that keeping an eye kind of on both time horizons are really important. So really preparing workers and learners, for the jobs of today as well as for the jobs of the future.
And speaking of the jobs of the future, there was a 2-year study from McKinsey Global Institute about AI saying that by 2030, robots could replace as much as 30% of the world's current human labor. So I guess my question is, will there even be jobs in the future for us?
Yes, I would say absolutely yes. There will still be jobs. I think what will change are the types of jobs and how workers kind of work with and alongside of technology. I think that's where we'll be seeing, I think, the most significant shift. I'm in the process of helping my oldest daughter get ready to go off to college and thinking about what she is packing compared to what I needed to pack when I headed off to college 30 plus years ago is a good reminder about how, how much technology changes and how quickly it can change. I was still using like an electronic typewriter, I think, when I went off to college for my freshman year, compared to just how advanced things are now when she's heading off to her dorm. So I think, really looking to see how we can continue to design and redesign jobs that can use technology to, take the, kind of routine parts of jobs like and make them easier for like humans to take the portions of the jobs that are more, kind of especially crafted for what they bring, to the roles. So I think that that's where we have, I think an exciting future to look forward to. I think what's important as part of that is that we continue to help individuals skill and reskill and upskill for those changing roles and making sure that they have the skills that are going to be needed both now and in the future. And I think we need a education system that is agile enough that can keep pace with that technological change. And I think that's where in the US, I think we still have quite a bit of work to do to make sure that that agility really is there across the board. So I'm not too worried about jobs disappearing. I think I'm worried about our ability to keep pace with the changing nature of jobs.
Now, I do want to get to the education stuff a little bit later because that's very important, right? What are we teaching our kids and how are we preparing them and training them to make sure that they are prepared for whatever future that might be? But I do want to go back on something you touched upon. You mentioned how you are taking your daughter to college and it's so different from when you were in college and the jobs you were training. And if we keep going back, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, the Industrial Revolution, it seems like the way we work and the kinds of things we do have just been changing at such an incredible speed, and they seem to be accelerating. Can you tell us a little bit about all those different revolutions, and how has our relationship to work changed over time?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, and it's one that I love to spend time thinking about and digging into, because I think, you know, particularly in the US, I think our relationship to work is really shaped by so many factors. There are those kind of macro and microeconomic trends that we touched on earlier. I think there's issues around gender roles and family structure that come into play. I think there's the um, advances in technology that we spoke about. I think all of those things, I think, play a role in how we relate to work. I also think that, where we are in this moment, and what we're seeing in the labor market through kind of the great resignation, we'll say, is the I think the expectations that workers have, particularly younger workers like Gen Z workers, that the expectations that they have for jobs and their workplaces. And I think that that's exciting and refreshing. And I think, to me, it's wonderful to see that kind of the generation that's coming into the workforce feels that sense of empowerment that I'm a Gen Xer, that my colleagues and I probably didn't see when we were entering the workforce for the first time, like in the 1990s. So I think it's an exciting time, but I think it also is one that requires employers to really be thinking about how to put their workers, at the center of their organizations and the policies that they are putting in place. And so, like at JFF, that has meant, us really looking at our paid time off policies, our remote work policies, how we're building a culture of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, within the workplace. And I think it's those trends that we're going to see continue. I don't think that that's something that's going to diminish over time. I think it's going to be something that expands over time. But I think at the same time, there's still a lot that needs to change, in terms of government programs, support that we give. So, for example, for childcare or universal pre-K, or issues that still really hold workers, I'd say particularly women workers, back from achieving some of the, career advancement, economic advancement that they're striving for. So I think there needs to be really fundamental changes to both kind of the employer side, but also the government side, and how we're supporting workers and their well-being and their economic well-being.
Digging now a little bit more into the education part of this, I remember when I was in school, my teacher said, you have to learn math because you're not going to always have a calculator in your pocket. And now I do, and someone was telling me the other day, they told me, I'm not gonna have my child learn any languages because, in a few years they're gonna put a microchip in her head and she's gonna speak all the languages of the world. And it just left me thinking, what kind of education do we need to be providing for our kids when we're thinking of preparing them for jobs in the future, when it's all changing so quickly?
Yeah, no, it's definitely changing quickly. I think there are a couple things that I would recommend. So one is, again, I think as a nation, there is a lot more that we can be doing to bring, lessons and examples of careers into the classroom at an earlier age. So I think really looking at career awareness, work-based learning opportunities, internships, other things, really is throughout high school, possibly even as early as middle school, just to really help young people better learn about careers and what their options are. Of course, those options are going to continue to change and expand as the years go by, but I think too often, we wait until someone is in 12th grade to really start digging into, what their next steps are going to be. And ideally, those conversations and that awareness building really starts happening much earlier in the process. And then in terms of the kind of the skills and the knowledge, I think, one of the first projects I worked at the U.S. Department of Labor back in the early 90s was something called SCANS, and it stood for Secretary's Commission on Achieving Necessary Skills. And back then we identified a number of skills that were really required in the workforce kind of across all jobs. And there are similar lists that still come out today. And I'm struck by how similar those lists are, even though they were developed 30 years apart. So things like teamwork and problem solving and communication skills are always going to be important. Of course, the technology pieces, in the report that we did back in 1992, I don't think we could have imagined what technology would have been like now. So, of course, those things are always going to have to evolve and change and become more sophisticated. But I think that, we have a pretty good baseline understanding of what those core, employability or power skills are. But I think that we need to be looking at how to more effectively be teaching them in schools, both teaching them and assessing them. But I think that's the more we can do that, I think the more we'll be assured that we're going to continue to have, engaged and skilled workers for the generations to come.
Oh, absolutely. That reminds me of a school I recently visited in which they had, for middle schoolers, they had an architecture course, and they covered physics and they covered math and they covered design, and the kids loved the course. And I thought, how cool. When I was in middle school, I would have really probably loved to have taken a course on architecture. So yeah, that sounds like a really cool solution, and I'm sure something that some schools are starting to implement. So as we're talking of the changes that are coming, I imagine a lot of this needs investment. I know that President Biden, for his 2023 budget, has proposed a 15% increase for the Department of Education, I think 18% in the Department of Labor. How are you hoping those monies and that investment gets spent?
Yeah, so a few things I would highlight. So, on the Department of Education side, we're really excited to see that the department is putting an emphasis on what they're calling career connected learning. So, models that really incorporate, some of the things we were just discussing around, bringing work-based learning experiences into the high school, really looking to see how to better design equitable pathways between high school and post-secondary and the labor market. So we're excited to see that be a priority for Secretary Cardona and his team. And on the labor side, one of the efforts that JFF is very involved with is the expansion of registered apprenticeship. So a lot of times when folks think of apprenticeship, they think of, kind of only jobs in the skilled trades. And we are, one of the groups that's really working to expand. So, of course, continuing the kind of historic focus on skilled trades, but also really bridging into other sectors, whether that be healthcare or finance or advanced manufacturing. And then also really working to diversify the characteristics of apprentices, both in terms of race and gender, and also looking at including more individual disabilities in registered apprenticeship programs. So it's great to see the Department of Labor having a focus on those issues. And then the second thing at DOL that we're excited about is they recently held a Good Jobs Summit. And so I think having the federal government really having a specific focus on what it means for a job to be a good job or a quality job is a great place for the federal government to be weighing in. And I think, getting back to our conversation about, putting the workers at the center of employer policy, looking at those elements of what makes something a good job is a critical part of that.
Indeed, it is, and I think that we're starting to see this historic shift. One of the other trends that I've been following closely is this growth of unions that we're seeing across many different sectors. This is something that kind of was born of the pandemic and of that labor shortage as well. So definitely lots of things happening that are impacting how we think of work and the way we work and where we do our work from. You have so much experience in this field. I wonder, what lessons have you learned that you might offer to employers and job seekers alike?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for job seekers, and this is whether it's a high school student who's looking at their next step or an older worker who's looking to change careers, is to really take an expansive look of what opportunities are out there. Explore new fields, explore kind of different ways of gaining new skills, and to really put an emphasis on kind of that navigation process. I would say that the country needs to do a better job of helping individuals have the information they need to do that. But I think for an individual to really think about not just about like what's the future of work, but what's the future of me in this evolving economy and kind of global landscape. So I think really having that like individual empowerment is really important. And on the employer side, JFF has put out a impact employer framework where we lay out specific steps that employers can take to really have a model where they're putting workers at the center. But I would say, specifically in this moment, I'd say really focusing on employee well-being. I know there's an increased emphasis, really important on mental health, looking to see how to provide more mental health support to employees, really looking to see how to build connectivity, particularly in hybrid or remote work situations, but really kind of leaning in to meet this moment, which I do think, in my 30 plus careers is a pretty unique moment in time, and one I think that's really demanding employers to show up in new ways.
I wonder, we've spoken about so many different topics from, like we mentioned, automation, the great resignation, this push towards unions. We know that we're not in a vacuum. Globalization and the work that people do in other parts of the world impacts us here as well. I wonder overall if you could give us a grade of how are we doing? How confident are you in how prepared we are for the coming changes in our labor market? What would you say?
Oh, I would say I would give us probably a overall grade of about a C. So I'd say we're kind of right in the middle. I think that there have been a lot of great steps and improvements over the past couple of years. Like one trend that I'm very encouraged by is we're seeing more and more companies investing in the skills and the advancement of their frontline workers. And so whether that's a company like Walmart or Costco or Amazon, we're seeing many examples of that. But on in terms of where I think we need more improvement, I think it is around really doing intentional work to close the equity gap in terms of economic advancement. So how are we truly providing equitable opportunities to all of our learners and workers? And how are we ensuring that the public systems on both the education and workforce sides are really, not just building off of, systems that were created back during the New Deal, but truly are systems that are preparing us, for the next 100 years. And I think too often policymakers are not making the hard decisions that are necessary to ensure that we're really equipped for the future. So I think I really think these next, 10 years or so are going to be really critical to see, can we as a nation both keep pace with the macro trends, but also ensuring that we're doing that in a way that increases equity.
Maria Flynn helping us prepare for the next 100 years. Maria, thank you so much for all that insight.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
You can learn a lot more about Maria by visiting jff.org, and you can find hundreds of other exceptional experts at www.rolliapp.com. That's Rolli, ROLLIAPP.com. I'm Catalina Villegas, and you can always connect with me on social media at Catalina Official, OFFCL, on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Until next time.